On the night of October 25, 1797, a eunuch named Hao Shitong made a mistake that would cost the emperor his palace. Hao's job was simple: tend the charcoal fires that kept the imperial chambers warm. But that night, exhausted and careless, he left a brazier of smouldering embers resting against a wooden partition inside the palace of heavenly purity. By the time the smell of smoke reached the guards, the flames had already climbed the silk curtains, raced across lacquered beams, and engulfed 3 of the Forbidden City's most sacred halls. Here is the paradox that defined life inside these walls. In one of the coldest capital cities on Earth, fire was both the only thing keeping the court alive and the thing most likely to kill them. So how did ancient Chinese emperors, concubines, and servants survive the brutal winters of the Forbidden City? The answer involves underground engineering older than the Roman hypocaust, walls insulated with crushed pepper, clothing made of paper, a strict hierarchy of warmth that could destroy a woman's life, and 1,000 men standing in the freezing dark so that one man could sleep. Welcome back to Silk Road Annals. 1. The architectural icebox. To understand the problem, you need to understand what the Forbidden City actually was, and what it was never meant to be. Chinese imperial architecture, from the Han palaces at Chang'an to the Ming and Qing Forbidden City, was built for cosmic symbolism and political intimidation, not for warmth. While medieval European nobles retreated into compact stone keeps with roaring fireplaces and low ceilings that trapped heat, Chinese architects went the opposite direction. They built vast, timber-framed halls with courtyards open to the sky, aligned on strict north-south axes that channeled the Siberian steppe winds straight through the palace grounds like a wind tunnel. Ceilings soared 20 meters above the floor. Walls were stone or brick. Floors were slabs of marble or hard-packed earth. Once these materials absorbed the winter cold, they radiated it back for days, turning the inner chambers into a stone refrigerator that fought every attempt at heating. This was by design. The vast emptiness was meant to reflect the emperor's mandate from heaven, an architecture of awe, not comfort. But thermally, it was devastating. Beijing's winters regularly plunge below -10 degrees Celsius. Inside these uninsulated halls, the temperature was often not much better than outside. So, how do you heat a space that was designed to be unheatable? The answer? You don't heat the room, you heat the floor. 2. The fire-breathing centipede. As early as the Qing Dynasty, over 2,000 years ago, centuries before the Roman hypocaust system reached its peak, Chinese engineers had already developed firewalls, an early form of radiant heating where ceramic tiles were fitted together to create channels inside walls for hot air to spread. By the Ming and Qing dynasties, this technology had evolved into a masterpiece of thermal engineering known as the Kang, the fire floor. Underneath the palace floors, architects built a complex network of subterranean smoke channels, laid with bricks and stones. The system was designed like a giant centipede, a main fire channel splitting into dozens of smaller branches that snaked beneath different halls and chambers. Instead of circulating hot water like modern radiant floor systems, the Kang used hot air. But if you have massive fires burning beneath a wooden palace, why wasn't the Forbidden City constantly on fire? The brilliance lies in the separation. The furnace pits were strictly located outdoors, hidden within the foundations or sunken areas beneath exterior corridors. Servants fed charcoal into these external furnaces, and the heated air traveled through the flues, warming the massive thermal weight of the marble floors above before safely venting through discrete chimneys. The fire never touched the wood. The heat was so evenly distributed that, according to court records, the emperor could comfortably walk barefoot on marble in the dead of winter. Inside the bedrooms, this system was rooted directly beneath the Kang, a raised brick or stone sleeping platform that served as the ultimate survival engine of northern China for over 1,000 years. Fires lit outside sent hot air through flues inside the platform. People spread thick quilts across the top and slept on gently radiating warmth that lasted all night. But the Kang reveals something deeper than engineering. Because inside the Forbidden City, who got heat and who didn't, was never just about survival. It was about power. 3. The currency of heat. The entire heating infrastructure of the Forbidden City depended on a strictly controlled supply of premium fuel called Hongluo charcoal. Produced from hardwood, Hongluo charcoal was dense, durable, nearly smokeless, and burned down to a fine white ash, perfect for the pristine imperial chambers. But Hongluo charcoal was rationed by the Imperial household department according to your exact rank. The Empress received 20 catties of premium charcoal every winter day. Imperial noble consorts received 15. Lower-ranking consorts received progressively less. And if you fell from the Emperor's favor, your allocation could vanish entirely. This is the real meaning of the cold palace, a term that most people assume refers to a specific, freezing building somewhere in the Forbidden City. It didn't. The cold palace was not a place, it was a condition. A disgraced concubine would simply have her fuel quotas cut. Her underground flues were left unmaintained. Her premium Hongluo charcoal was replaced with cheap, smoky coal that stung the eyes and blackened the walls. The cold she endured was not an accident of architecture. It was a deliberate instrument of punishment, a slow, grinding erasure carried out not with chains or prison cells, but with thermodynamics. And in a cruel irony of physics, the palace's hierarchy of comfort was sometimes flipped entirely. Cooks and stable boys, the lowest ranks, often slept in far warmer conditions than a disgraced noble consort. They curled up near the constant radiating heat of the massive palace kitchens, or beside the living body warmth of livestock in the stables. Inside the Forbidden City, warmth had less to do with your title than with raw, functional necessity. But even for those who received their full charcoal rations, the Kang and braziers alone were not enough to survive Beijing's worst nights. The court needed to wear their warmth, and their solutions ranged from the luxurious to the bizarre. 4. Pepper walls and paper clothes. During the Han Dynasty, the imperial family constructed what they called temperature-adjustable halls. The walls of these chambers were insulated with a unique mixture of clay infused with crushed Sichuan pepper. This pepper plaster did 3 things at once. It created a thermal mass that retained heat. It emitted a subtle warm fragrance that masked the stale air of sealed rooms. And, according to court belief, it warded off evil spirits. The technique was so valued that these chambers became known as pepper rooms, and the term eventually became a poetic synonym for the Empress's private quarters. Centuries later, the court's approach to cold shifted to the body itself. And here, Chinese ingenuity produced something that surprises most people: paper clothing. Long before cotton became widely available in China, ordinary families and lower-ranking palace staff wore garments called jichu, robes made entirely from tightly woven mulberry bark fibers. These paper clothes were surprisingly effective, lightweight, windproof, and cheap enough that even the poorest servants could afford them. Paper armor, paper blankets, and paper curtains were all documented across multiple dynasties. For the elite, winter clothing was a matter of extreme layering. Noble men and women wore cotton-padded jackets, wool socks, fur-lined boots, and quilted robes, and they did not undress to sleep. The emperor's bedding was an exercise in engineering by itself. Thickened silks, dense furs of sable and fox, and quilts stuffed with cotton or goose feathers, sometimes so heavy that attendants had to physically help seal the layers around him, tucking him in like a vault against the cold. Heat escaped fastest from the scalp, so nightcaps and padded earmuffs were not fashion accessories. They were survival equipment. But all of these defenses, the heated floors, the pepper walls, the layers of fur, still could not eliminate the most dangerous source of warmth in the palace, the one that killed silently. 5. The invisible assassin. In the vast, cavernous halls where the underground heating couldn't reach, people relied on huopen, charcoal braziers. These metal bowls filled with glowing charcoal were everywhere, beside beds, at the feet of officials during late-night court discussions, clustered around the doorways of concubines' chambers. They were also a constant, silent killer. Carbon monoxide poisoning, known historically as charcoal sickness, was so common in the imperial court that it was extensively documented across multiple dynasties. In poorly ventilated rooms, sealed tight against the winter wind, the odorless gas accumulated without warning. Ming Dynasty records note several deaths caused not by cold exposure, but by suffocation from charcoal fumes. Palace servants were trained to monitor braziers with obsessive vigilance, feeding them just enough fuel to produce heat through the night without overwhelming the air in the room. And if the invisible gas didn't kill you, the flames would. Remember Hao Shitong. The Forbidden City was a massive tinderbox of dry timber and silk. One careless ember, one gust of wind through an open corridor, and entire complexes could be consumed in hours. This constant terror drove the Qing emperors to create one of the most sophisticated fire suppression organizations in the pre-modern world. By the reign of Emperor Yongzheng, the Forbidden City maintained 1,288 trained firefighters, more than many mid-sized modern cities deploy, operating across 37 permanent guard stations within the palace walls. These men were selected for physical strength and calm temperament. Their job was not merely reactive. They patrolled continuously, inspecting every brazier, every furnace, every candle. Because in a palace made of wood, the line between warmth and catastrophe was measured in inches. The danger of open flame pushed the court towards something safer, smaller, and far more elegant. 6. The pocket-sized furnaces. If you have ever watched a Chinese historical drama, you have seen them. Beautifully carved metal objects cradled in the hands of empresses and concubines. These are shoulu, hand warmers, and they were miniature masterpieces of thermal design. Made of copper for optimal heat conductivity, they featured a double-walled construction. Users placed hot charcoal in the inner chamber and covered it with a layer of ash to slow the burn. The outer shell, intricately carved with dragons, lotus flowers, or auspicious symbols, allowed air to circulate freely without ever burning the user's skin. A single loading of charcoal could provide 6 to 8 hours of gentle, continuous warmth, enough to last an entire night of court duties or a long sedan chair journey through the frozen palace grounds. For sleeping, the court relied on the tang posy, affectionately nicknamed the Foot Mother. This was a flat, sealed vessel made of copper or tin, filled with boiling water and wrapped tightly in cloth. Placed under the blankets at the foot of the bed, it radiated warmth through the night with zero smoke, zero flame, and zero risk of carbon monoxide. It was the safest heat source in the entire palace, and for many concubines whose charcoal rations had been reduced, it was sometimes the only one. So far, we have talked about the people who slept inside the walls, the emperor in his heated chambers, the consorts with their hand warmers and fur quilts. But there was one group of men who had none of these things, and their survival was the most brutal endurance test in the Forbidden City. 7. The frozen sentinels. Picture an imperial guard from the elite 8 banners, stationed on the massive outer walls of the Forbidden City. It is 2 in the morning. The temperature is 15 below zero. The Siberian wind cuts across the open battlements with nothing to break it. You have no heated floors, no silk quilts, no hand warmers. Your only protection is a thickly padded cotton armor uniform issued strictly for winter duty. Survival depended on relentless, deliberate movement. Guards marched back and forth along their stations, stamping their feet on the frozen flagstones to keep blood circulating. Some tucked heated stones inside their sleeves or cuffs. Others passed a flask of spiced rice wine between comrades. Modern physiology tells us the alcohol actually lowered their core body temperature, but it dulled the raw psychological edge of the cold, and sometimes that was enough. You could not stop. You could not sit. You could not close your eyes. According to the palace code, a guard who fell asleep at his post faced flogging, dismissal, or execution. In Imperial service, the cold was not weather. It was an existential test of loyalty. And this is the truth that the heated floors and pepper walls and elegant hand warmers obscure. The warmth enjoyed by the emperor was entirely produced by unseen labor. Eunuchs hauled massive quantities of charcoal through sub-zero outdoor corridors to feed the underground furnaces, their hands cracked and bleeding from the cold. Attendants stayed awake all night, monitoring braziers and replacing hot water vessels. Guards stood frozen on the walls so that the man inside could sleep. Every degree of imperial comfort was purchased with someone else's suffering. Conclusion. So how did the ancient Chinese sleep in castles without freezing to death? They survived through a fusion of architectural genius and relentless human labor. They heated the floor, not the room. They crushed pepper into their walls. They wore paper when they couldn't afford fur. They carried fire in the palms of their hands and placed hot water at their feet. They rationed warmth like currency, granting it to the powerful, withdrawing it from the disgraced. And on the walls above it all, 1,000 men stood shivering through the night, stamping their boots on frozen stone, watching their breath turn to ice in the dark. In the morning, the emperor rose from his heated Kang and walked barefoot across warm marble, never once thinking about the fires beneath his feet, or the frozen hands that fed them. Just as Hao Shitong learned on that October night in 1797, inside the Forbidden City, fire was never neutral. It was the thin, unstable line between survival and destruction, and it demanded constant, sleepless vigilance from the men who would never be remembered. If you enjoyed this journey, subscribe to Silk Road Annals and join us for the next chapter of history.
Stretches onward into the unknown.